The galaxy had always been a stage for empires, but the Galactic Empire stood above all. Its conquests stretched beyond counting, its technology unmatched. To its rulers, humanity was a curiosity, an odd little species that burned bright for a moment, then fell. Now, under alien banners and watchful eyes, the world felt heavy, silent, beaten down but not broken. In the heart of the city, a new decree echoed, all relics of war to be surrendered, all human history to be filtered and judged. The Empire's governor, gleaming in alien regalia, mocked the assembled crowd, translating his words into every Earth dialect. We bring order, progress. You bring toys and myths. Be grateful. The humans listened. Some eyes burned with hate, others, resignation. But one pair watched with careful calculation, belonging to a young museum worker who had lived his life among memories of lost wars and faded flags. He had catalogued artifacts, dusted glass cases, and knew that history wasn't just written by the victors. Sometimes it lay buried, waiting for the right hands. Imperial soldiers strutted through the city's museum, forcing the staff aside. They laughed at the racks of rifles, the silent tanks, and most of all, the ancient machine gun at the entrance. It stood on spindly legs, a relic from a war fought before the Empire ever mapped the stars. Does this even function? One sneered, prodding the cooling jacket. Another scoffed, these weapons could never breach our shields. Their voices dripped with the certainty of invincibility. The museum worker said nothing, but his fingers itched. He remembered his grandfather's stories, the stories the Empire never bothered to hear. In his mind, he replayed every whispered word, every warning, never underestimate what people fight for when everything's been taken. The Empire's law was iron, any attempt to preserve, let alone use, an ancient weapon was a crime. Amnesty was offered for compliance, but everyone knew what happened to those who hid relics. Drones circled, watching. Surrender or be erased, the silent message. As the museum was cleared, one officer paused at the machine gun and spat, to think your ancestors believed this was powerful. The crowd was forced to watch as soldiers paraded out, leaving the exhibits gutted and spirits hollow. The Empire's arrogance was not just in its weapons, but in its belief that Earth's spirit could be catalogued, boxed, and controlled. Back at his modest apartment, the museum worker sat with a small group: an engineer, a schoolteacher, a mother, an old wounded soldier. Conversation was careful, paranoia hung in the air. The Empire's informants were everywhere. But grief made them bold, and humiliation fanned the flames. Each had lost something: family, freedom, the right to hope. They spoke in low voices. The engineer shook his head, speaking of energy shields and force fields, all calibrated to stop the modern and the powerful. The soldier muttered, they never learned how we fought before all this tech. The mother gripped her child's photo, her voice steady, we don't have their weapons, but we have our stories. And we have nothing left to lose. News spread through the city, more museums stripped, statues torn down, every last reminder of defiance erased. The Empire wanted obedience, not memory. And every day, they broadcast victory parades, columns of aliens marching through Earth's streets, shields shimmering, as if to stamp out every ember. The governor gave speeches from balconies high above the crowds, promising a new era. The past is dead. There will be no more wars. But on the ground, pain simmered. The museum worker walked the streets, seeing eyes meet his, sharing silent messages. A nod here, a tight smile there. The Empire watched for overt rebellion, but not for the quiet resolve that grows in silence. A rumor whispered its way through the alleys: some relics had not been surrendered. Someone had hidden ammunition, someone else knew how to repair old machines. The Empire scoffed. They monitored for energy surges, encrypted transmissions, never thinking to search for the hidden language of resistance, written in glances and memories. Back at the museum, the machine gun sat ignored. A child pressed her nose to the glass, asking her father what it was. He smiled softly and answered, it was hope, once. His voice lingered in the worker's mind long after he walked away. Night brought curfews, patrols, interrogations. But in that darkness, the worker planned. He kept his head down, did his job, smiled at his overseers, all while tracing the possibilities in his mind. He remembered every mechanism, every bolt, every worn groove in that ancient weapon. Its power wasn't just in bullets, it was in the message that a tool, once dismissed, could still matter. He reached out to those he trusted most, weighing every risk. Each person had a secret, a pain the Empire could not erase. As they gathered in shadow, there was no need for grand speeches. Only this: we have one chance. It's all or nothing. And in every heart, the answer was the same. By dawn, the museum worker moved with new purpose. The Empire's arrogance filled the city like smog, but he saw past it, saw what the aliens could never understand. History is not a straight line. Sometimes, the oldest paths lead to the fiercest resistance. Sometimes, the relics they mock become the spark that burns through the dark. And as the sun rose, the quiet resolve became something more: a promise. If the Empire wanted Earth's spirit broken, they would have to bury every story, every memory, and every last survivor. The cost, they had not begun to imagine. Whispers grew into plans. The museum worker and his small circle met in silence, their trust forged by loss. Every member carried scars: the engineer's trembling hands from the mines, the mother's haunted gaze from her vanished husband, the teacher's limp from standing up to patrols. Their pain was currency. They spent it now on hope. The Empire's broadcasts bragged of peace and progress, parading surrender as triumph. Every transmission was a reminder of humiliation, but it only sharpened their resolve. The old soldier described what it meant to stand in the mud and hold the line, how 100 years ago, the machine gun turned impossible odds. He remembered the sound, the fear it brought to enemies, and the stubborn defiance it fed in his own chest. They clung to these stories as blueprints, not nostalgia. In the back room, the engineer dismantled the machine gun piece by piece. Every part was familiar, a jigsaw puzzle older than the Empire itself. He cleaned, oiled, and rebuilt it, all while the group scavenged for anything that might serve as ammunition. A mechanic offered a few spent cartridges, a shopkeeper produced metal scraps, and the mother traded her last family heirloom for gunpowder. No one hesitated. The past was already gone, only the future mattered. Their hands trembled as they tested the weapon. The noise was muffled, but even that little staccato brought everyone to attention. It was real. It was theirs. For a moment, they dared to dream. But the engineer reminded them, the Empire's armor shrugged off lasers, vaporized missiles, but was never designed for something as primitive as lead. Their shields, calibrated for energy, left a gap, a simple flaw in arrogance. They watched the Empire patrols closely. The city was mapped by memory, every alley and rooftop a piece of a larger plan. They memorized routines, found blind spots, listened for slip-ups in alien chatter. The teacher kept track of new recruits, noticing nervousness, distraction, signs of a garrison that believed its own propaganda. At night, the group argued in hushed voices. Was it worth it? If they failed, there would be no mercy. The Empire made examples of dissenters, erasing entire families. The mother spoke first, voice brittle but clear. Her daughter's future mattered more than fear. The old soldier gripped his cane tighter, declaring there was no living in defeat. The museum worker, usually quiet, simply said, "We're already ghosts if we do nothing." Supplies trickled in. Old uniforms, rations, even outdated radios passed from hand to hand. Every gift was a risk, every helper a liability, but the city's undercurrent ran deeper than fear. Even those too broken to fight passed messages, mapped hiding places, kept watch from windows. Resistance was not just a handful of rebels, it was a city breathing beneath the Empire's heel. The engineer fashioned makeshift ammunition with the precision of a surgeon. The teacher recruited a handful of students, trusted for their loyalty and stealth. The group rehearsed their movements, timed their drills, imagined every possible way things could go wrong. They were not soldiers, not anymore, but necessity taught faster than any academy. A plan took shape. The Empire's parade would run through the city's old heart, past the museum, under the eyes of the governor. It was meant to humiliate, to remind everyone who was in control. But it was also a pattern, predictable, ritualized, arrogant. The group decided, this was their moment. As the day neared, tension mounted. The mother wrote a letter for her daughter, just in case. The engineer left instructions for repairs, should he not return. The old soldier reviewed the weapon again and again, ensuring it would not fail when the world was watching. They spoke of nothing personal, only details, contingencies, signals. Each word was a promise and a goodbye. A sympathetic guard smuggled them a security badge. A janitor erased camera footage from the storage closet. A child delivered a hand-drawn map with patrol timings hidden in the artwork. All across the city, small acts of defiance wove a tapestry of risk and hope. The museum worker barely slept. He replayed the plan in his mind, worried every angle, imagined every way it might unravel. He wasn't afraid to die only to fail and see his people's last spark stamped out forever. But when he looked at his friends, at their silent determination, he felt something stubborn ignite. This was not for victory. This was to remind the Empire that humans did not kneel, not truly, not in the places that mattered. The night before, they gathered one last time. No one made speeches. They checked their gear, traded nervous smiles, hugged awkwardly, said nothing. When dawn came, it would be all or nothing. In the darkness, 1,000 silent wishes rose, a plea to ancestors, to the universe, to anything that remembered the meaning of freedom. When the city woke, the streets were draped in alien banners, the air thick with anticipation and resentment. Somewhere beneath the weight of history and occupation, a group of ordinary people became something extraordinary. They moved with quiet resolve, invisible in their own home, carrying not just a machine gun, but every story, every sacrifice, every stubborn refusal to be forgotten. Failure was still possible. Death was likely. But for the first time in a long time, hope felt heavier than fear. And as they moved into position, the Empire still oblivious, the human spirit prepared to test its strength against the arrogance of the stars. The day arrived with the Empire's confidence at its peak. Alien banners rippled overhead in streets choked with soldiers in glittering formation. Drones hovered, broadcasting images to worlds across the galaxy, proof of total domination. The city's people lined the sidewalks, forced to witness another display of power meant to crush the last embers of resistance. The governor's voice boomed from loudspeakers, a self-satisfied litany of empire and peace. But beneath the surface, tension coiled. The museum worker and his group waited, hidden in plain sight, every heartbeat counting down to a single moment. The machine gun was ready, loaded with hope and desperation. Alien commanders barked orders. Troops preened, adjusting shields they believed made them invincible. The parade moved like clockwork, each step rehearsed, each gesture another insult to the people who watched, silent and simmering. Among them, eyes flicked to secret signals. Hands clenched in pockets. Courage pooled where the Empire expected only submission. The final moment arrived. The parade neared the museum, passing the place where the Empire first scoffed at human weapons. As the governor raised his hand to signal another speech, the museum worker acted. He pressed the trigger and time fractured. The machine gun's ancient roar shattered the illusion of order. Kinetic rounds ripped through the air, the weapon stuttering and thundering with mechanical certainty. At first, alien shields glowed in response, but almost instantly, the rounds tore through. Soldiers, bred for distant wars and sanitized violence, screamed in shock as their armor failed. Panic exploded. Lines broke. The governor's command vanished beneath chaos. The city's drones, programmed to capture victory, streamed carnage across the Empire's networks. Audiences on distant worlds watched as the invincible force reeled, their champions bleeding and scrambling for cover. The machine gun's fire didn't let up. It spat a relentless challenge, sweeping across the ranks with the old, merciless rhythm that once changed the world. Each round was a lesson the Empire had never cared to learn, that fear is not a shield, and arrogance is not armor. Aliens stumbled, tripped over each other, shields buckling or shattering. Their weapons, designed for overwhelming energy duels, stuttered or backfired in the tight urban chaos. The old soldier's training showed in the gun's rhythm, guiding bursts where panic was thickest. The engineer kept the weapon fed and cool, hands moving with desperate precision. The teacher and mother covered the flanks, holding the line as civilians, emboldened by the spectacle, surged to disrupt alien patrols. The uprising bloomed across the city in seconds, every hidden plan snapping into action. Alien commanders shouted orders no one followed. Elite troopers fell, their bodies scattered with the debris of arrogance. The empire's spectacle had become a broadcast humiliation. Civilians seized abandoned weapons, barricaded streets, and rallied around the ancient gun's thunder. Where the empire expected only submission, they found an awakening. For the first time since conquest, the city roared with something greater than fear. Shouts echoed, 1,000 voices reclaiming what had been stolen. As alien lines collapsed, the governor and his officers scrambled for safety, their armor nothing but dead weight. The museum worker's hands ached, arms numb from the recoil, but he didn't stop. Each spent casing was a rejection of defeat, each burst a demand for recognition. The gun was more than metal, it was memory, vengeance, and a promise that humanity's past would not be erased. Across the city, ordinary people rose. The janitor who erased footage now blocked an alley with a mop handle and an iron glare. The sympathetic guard turned his rifle against his former masters. The teacher's students became couriers, racing through backstreets with urgent messages and scavenged supplies. The rebellion was uncoordinated, raw, but unstoppable. Alien support columns tried to regroup, but every attempt was broken by guerrilla tactics and stubborn defense. The Empire's technological edge blunted against unpredictability and grit. The engineers' sabotage caused power to flicker and shields to collapse at crucial moments. Every setback compounded, panic spiraled, and Imperial discipline frayed into terror. As the machine gun's last rounds fired, the air thick with smoke and ringing with echoes, the city stood transformed. Silence stretched only for a breath. Then cheers erupted, wild and defiant, carrying hope from street to rooftop and back again. The museum worker, drenched in sweat and dust, slumped to the ground, the gun spent but victorious. Cameras caught every moment. Across the galaxy, people watched the collapse of certainty. The Empire's citizens, who'd grown up on stories of human weakness, now saw the cost of contempt. Subject worlds watched, and in every heart a new, dangerous question took root: if humans could stand, what else was possible? The city's defenders gathered, tending to wounds and counting losses. The price was high, but the outcome undeniable. The governor's speeches were replaced by desperate pleas for reinforcements. Command channels flooded with reports of mutiny and rebellion elsewhere. The Empire's grip loosened, its myth of invincibility shattered by a weapon once declared obsolete. The machine gun, battered and scorched, became a relic again, but this time, a symbol not of defeat but of resurgence. The humans who survived stood shoulder to shoulder, breathing free air for the first time in memory, their faces lit by something the Empire could never suppress. The message was carried far beyond the city: human will, once underestimated, was a force even the stars must reckon with. The museum worker, surrounded by allies, found himself unable to speak. Words felt small compared to what had just happened. Around him, people embraced, wept, and laughed. Grief and joy mingled as one. For a moment, victory tasted like redemption. There was no certainty about what came next. The Empire would strike back. There would be losses, reprisals, long nights of fear. But hope was heavier than dread, and the ancient machine gun had done more than kill, it had awakened a future. The faceless Empire had failed to see the faces behind the defiance. And as the news spread to distant worlds, a lesson went with it: never mock what you refuse to understand. Never count out those who refuse to kneel. When the city fell quiet, it was a different silence, one that trembled with exhaustion and something like awe. The air smelled of smoke and freedom. Survivors huddled together, bruised but upright, strangers now brothers and sisters in arms. The machine gun, battered and spent, sat at the center of the square, transformed from relic to legend in the space of a morning. Word spread faster than the Empire's censors could respond. First by whispers, then by pirate transmissions, finally by official broadcasts that could not be suppressed. Across conquered worlds, people watched the footage again and again, the instant when arrogance met steel, the moment shields failed and the Empire's best bled in the streets of a backwater planet they thought pacified. For many, it was the first time they saw the Empire lose. Within the city, people mourned and celebrated in equal measure. The price of defiance was written in missing faces and shattered homes, but pride swelled in the empty spaces. The governor, once smug, was nowhere to be found. Rumors ran wild about his desperate escape, about traitorous commanders, about the panic gripping the alien garrisons. Some said he had begged for sanctuary from the very people he tried to subjugate. No one wept for him. In the ruins, the group that had started it all regrouped. The engineer patched wounds and the old soldier counted heads, every survivor a small miracle. The teacher, voice hoarse from shouting orders, clung to a sense of purpose that would not fade with the gun's last shot. The mother cradled her child, promising her a future no one else could dictate. The museum worker moved quietly among them, hands shaking, haunted by the faces of those lost but alive with new purpose. Beyond the city, the impact of their defiance rippled. On distant worlds, other oppressed peoples whispered about the day the machine gun roared. Alien collaborators hesitated. Some refused orders to put down protests, others began passing secrets to local rebels. A single act of resistance broke the illusion of control. The Empire's enemies now knew its armor was not impenetrable. On worlds once cowed into silence, seditious slogans appeared overnight. Old human weapons, once hidden or dismissed as junk, were dug up, polished, revered. The Empire's command council gathered in crisis. Reports from Earth's city painted a picture of chaos. Frantic debates echoed through marble halls. How could such a small force inflict so much damage? Why had no one considered that ancient weapons might still pose a threat? Some commanders blamed each other. A few, watching the footage on repeat, recognized something deeper. The flaw was never in their technology, but in their certainty. As news spread, a shift began in the Empire's own population. Subjects who had long accepted the narrative of human weakness now saw faces, names, courage. The myth of human submission cracked. On newsnets, commentators argued about the implications. Was it an isolated incident or the start of something much bigger? In every debate, hope crept in where despair had ruled. In the city, life staggered toward a new normal. There were burials, speeches, long hours clearing rubble and rebuilding trust. The rebellion's survivors became leaders, some reluctantly, others with a sense of destiny. Children asked about the machine gun, parents answered not with tales of violence but of resolve. People began to dream again. The future was uncertain, but the yoke of inevitability had been shattered. For the museum worker and his friends, each day brought new challenges. Rumors of Empire retaliation grew, but so did the determination to resist. They built barricades, forged alliances, shared food and memories. The machine gun was cleaned and placed in a new case, not as a relic of shame but as a symbol of what happens when people refuse to surrender their story. Visitors would stop, touch the glass, and remember the day everything changed. Elsewhere, the spark became wildfire. In distant colonies, small bands of rebels coordinated attacks with little more than stolen blueprints and centuries-old tactics. Smuggled messages and images of the uprising fueled courage. The Empire responded with crackdowns, but every act of violence only spawned more resistance. The narrative had shifted, fear now worked both ways. Within the Empire's council, divisions deepened. Some argued for negotiations, others for harsher measures. For the first time, the certainty that had built their civilization seemed to falter. Commanders re-examined their strategies. Scientists began research into the very weapons they once dismissed. The threat was no longer theoretical, it was real, embodied in the image of a machine gun spitting fire while banners burned. As the weeks passed, the city healed. The faces of the fallen were honored in murals and stories. Survivors became teachers, passing on not only the tactics but the lessons. Arrogance breeds weakness, and underestimating the spirit of the oppressed is the oldest mistake in history. People walked taller, carried themselves differently. They were not subjects, they were citizens of a world reclaimed, if only for a day. At night, the museum worker sometimes returned to the square. He would sit in the shadows and listen to the wind in the battered trees, the distant laughter of children playing where once there had been only silence and fear. In those moments, he understood what had been won, not just a battle, but the right to hope, to remember, to be human in the face of the unimaginable. Across the stars, oppressed peoples drew strength from the story. On worlds both human and alien, those who had lost everything now found reason to rise. The machine gun, once a joke, now meant revolution. The Empire's age of easy conquest was over. What lay ahead would be hard, uncertain, and full of risk. But the lesson was clear: courage is older than any empire. Hope cannot be conquered. And sometimes, the smallest spark is enough to set the darkness ablaze.